thin line between commerce and conflict has suddenly become a road. On April 25, Pakistan put into force a new statutory order opening designated overland corridors that allow Iran and third countries to move cargo through Pakistan ports and across Balochistan to Iran's borders. At first glance, it reads like a technical fix: new routes, clearer customs rules, easier cargo movement. Look closer, and it is also a statement about leverage, mediation, and the shifting geometry of regional power. The order designates a set of principal routes across southern Pakistan, tying coastal gateways to frontier crossings. Karachi and Port Qasim on Sindh's coast and Gwadar on the Balochistan shoreline are now linked through inland corridors that run to Taftan and other border points with Iran. The passages thread through towns and crossings: Turbat, Hoshab, Panjur, Nakouzing, Panjur, Nakundi, Quetta, a network that can carry containerized trade from ships off the Arabian Sea directly onto Pakistani roads, railways, and then across the frontier into Iran. There is one clear condition attached: consignments destined for Iran or transiting to it from third countries must be backed by an encashable bank guarantee equal to Pakistan's import duties. The requirement is a customs safeguard, a bureaucratic lever meant to keep transit flows regular, ensure revenue for the state, and discourage illicit diversion. In language that will feel familiar to trade officials and compliance officers, it ties the commercial opening to a financial tether that must be honoured before a truck leaves the port. Why now? The timing is as important as the text. Maritime routes in the Gulf and the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz have been under strain since a flare of strikes and counterstrikes in the region. Shipping lines and insurers have recalibrated risk, schedules have been rerouted, and thousands of containers have piled up at South Asian ports. Industry estimates point to a backlog of boxes, containers, that cannot be moved by sea because carriers are avoiding contested waters, or because insurance for certain voyages has become prohibitively expensive. For shippers whose cargo is already on the ground in Karachi or Gwadar, an overland corridor is not a theory, it is relief. Local commerce leaders made the logic bluntly practical. These corridors shorten transit times, reduce exposure to maritime disruption, and create an alternative route between South Asia and markets to the west. For exporters in Sindh and Balochistan, the new framework gives permanence to routes that traders were already using informally. Ports that have been the focus of heavy investment, Gwadar in particular, get an immediate shot at regional relevance beyond local ambitions. The old border crossings that sit a few dozen kilometres inland from the coast are reactivated, and the paperwork that used to be a headache becomes a legal framework that underwrites regular trade. But the corridors do more than mow. Boxes, they send a diplomatic message. Pakistan's announcement followed high-level shuttle diplomacy on Islamabad soil. Iran's foreign minister arrived in late April for consultative talks with Pakistan's leadership as mediators pressed to revive a fragile pause in hostilities. Within days, he moved on to other regional stops, underscoring how quickly the shuttle diplomacy has been moving. When asked whether Washington's approach signaled seriousness, he cut to the point. He said, "We have yet to see." Those 4 words capture the uneasy choreography of this moment. For weeks, intermediaries have been shuttling between capitals. Pakistan has emerged as a physical and political conduit. The new transit order is both a practical response to supply chain disruption and an assertion of leverage, an invitation to Iran to move goods by land while simultaneously nudging the global trading system to recognize Pakistan as an alternative route when the sea is contested. Washington noticed. For the last several weeks, the US has balanced pressure and diplomacy, maintaining military options and public vows of firmness while pushing intermediaries to secure a lasting pause. The administration supported a negotiating effort that would have sent 2 trusted intermediaries to Islamabad: Jared Kushner, a senior presidential advisor and former Middle East negotiator, and a private sector figure who had been tapped to serve as a special envoy. Those plans were suddenly altered when the president called off the trip in public comments with mixed confidence and impatience. He wrote and said in blunt terms, "We have all the cards." They have none. Soon after, he added, "They can call us any time they want." The cancellations mattered less for the names involved than for what they signaled. Travel plans changed not because the issues were solved, but because Washington chose to make its posture part of the negotiation. The president insisted cancelling the envoys did not mean tourney.
NG toured further military escalation, but he offered no clear diplomatic alternative beyond maintaining US leverage. That ambiguity created an opening for Tehran to test whether US resolve is iron or brittle, and for Islamabad to deepen a role as a platform for indirect talks.
Into that opening stepped an internal legal memorandum from the State Department's legal office, a text that landed squarely in the debate over the legitimacy of recent strikes in the region. The department's legal advisor explained the administration's legal rationale for the actions taken in late February. The United States is engaged in this conflict at the request of and in the collective self-defense of its Israeli ally, as well as in the exercise of the United States' own inherent right of self-defense. The line matters because it frames the US role as collective and allied, rather than purely unilateral, an assertion meant to anchor action in the language of international norms and mutual defense. Critics seized on the document and said it stretches familiar concepts. Supporters said it is consistent with long-standing interpretations when an ally's survival is at stake. In either case, the memo deepened debate in Washington and abroad about legal cover for military operations and the shape of future diplomacy. Pakistan's corridors intersect awkwardly with all of that. From a purely commercial perspective, they are an elegant response to a choke point. When seaborne access through the Gulf becomes risky or slow, a land bridge through southern Pakistan provides an immediate alternative. Shipping companies can shorten their schedules, exporters can diversify. For countries in South and Central Asia that were once reliant on northern land routes or on maritime passages that skirt the Gulf, the southern corridor represents an additional option, a complement to, not necessarily a rival of existing freight arteries. But the corridors also carry politics. Any expansion of trade Iran will be watched closely in Washington, where economic isolation has been a tool of pressure. Pakistan's permission to transit goods, even under customs guarantees and financial safeguards, shifts the balance of leverage in small but important ways. The encashable bank guarantee is a clear attempt to neutralize many of those concerns. A revenue-preserving, paperwork-based control designed to discourage diversion and to reassure partners that the movement of goods will be transparent and accountable. Yet guarantees do not erase politics. Every truck that turns east out of Karachi or west out of Gwadar toward Tehran carries not only goods but a signal about which pathways remain open in a region where access is increasingly political. The politics of mediation and the practice of trade also intersect in who moves and who pays the price when things go wrong. Port workers, truck drivers, customs officials and small traders are part of this negotiation by default. Some will see opportunity, new freight, more predictable income, the creation of logistics jobs that have been promised for years. Others will face volatility if diplomacy falters or if outside pressures force a clampdown. Those same supply chains can be turned into choke points. For many on the ground, the corridors are less about strategy and more about whether they can get their goods to market before the next disruption. Industry voices in Karachi and Islamabad have been explicit that the corridors were already serving as a makeshift route when shipping lanes were constricted. Trade estimates place thousands of containers destined for Iran stored at Pakistani ports after a partial maritime blockade and a sharp retrenchment of maritime traffic in the region. By giving those boxes legal permanence in a customs framework, is offering a rapid alternative to the long vulnerable voyage that skirts the Gulf. For shipping companies, the attraction is immediate, shorter transit time, lower exposure to strikes and seizures, and the ability to keep freight moving even while insurers adapt their risk models. There are strategic consequences beyond logistics. Pakistan's move is an assertion of autonomy and influence at a delicate moment. By opening corridors that materially help Iran and third country trade partners, Islamabad positions itself as both a mediator and a gatekeeper. That posture will test the partnership with Washington. US officials will watch how guarantees are enforced, whether transit corridors are used strictly for commercial consignments, and whether sanctions compliance and financial controls are respected. If Pakistan can enforce the paperwork, collect duties and prevent diversion, it will argue that it has managed a delicate balance between commerce and obligation. If enforcement falters, pressure from partners may follow. At the same time, Tehran has used the moment to signal confidence. Iran's diplomatic messaging has emphasized that it did not start the conflict and that it possesses a military posture meant to deter escalation, its defense ministry framed Washington's approach as a search for a face-saving escape. That rhetoric layered atop shuttle diplomacy through capitals like Islamabad and Muscat produces a choreography in which travel itself becomes a metric of seriousness. Who moves and whether envoys meet matters. A cancelled visit or a hurried itinerary sends signals as loud as any spoken statement. The legal argumentation in Washington will also shape the next phase. The internal memorandum that framed US strikes as part of a collective self-defense posture was not just a legal exercise, it was a political move meant to shore up domestic and international legitimacy. Congressional reckoning is likely. The administration will seek forms of support or legal pathways to justify ongoing use of force, and opponents will press scrutiny. That political tug will influence the diplomacy on the ground in Islamabad and beyond. For the countries now rethinking their supply chains, the corridors open new commercial calculations. A durable overland alternative could reroute trade maps for years to come. Firms that invest in Pakistan as a logistics hub may find it a cheaper or more reliable route to Central Asia and the Persian Gulf than the alternatives they built precisely to avoid Pakistan. India's historical investments in other ports and the northern land routes that have long been used to bypass the subcontinent will be weighed against the sudden availability of a southern corridor that cuts both distance and risk. Who benefits most over the long term is an open question. Economic ties can soften political frictions, but trade can also become another domain of contestation. Washington may attempt to pressure Islamabad to limit or condition transit flows in ways that could strain the partnership between the two countries. Tehran will test whether land access translates into durable commercial integration or is simply a wartime workaround. Regional players will watch whether the corridor becomes institutionalized, governed by transparent procedures, stable tariffs, and reliable legal frameworks, or whether it remains episodic, rising and falling with the next diplomatic crisis. For now, the scene is defined by careful hedging. Pakistan insists it is facilitating mediation. Iran says it will engage through intermediation. Iran says it will engage through intermediation, legal justification, and public bluster. Each side is testing the edges of leverage and measurement. As diplomats move from capital to capital, as legal memoranda circulate and envoys are appointed or called off, the transit order is more than a bureaucratic measure. It is a wager that markets will value new roadways and that mediation will continue. It is a gamble that a country perched between maritime and overland routes can convert geography into influence. If that gamble pays off, the corridors will deliver more than containers. They will widen economic opportunity in port cities, create jobs in logistics and transport, and redraw trade patterns that have long been fixed by the limitations of maritime choke points. If it fails, those same corridors could become a source of diplomatic friction, a route by which sanctions and security concerns collide with local livelihoods. The next weeks will tell. Will Washington respond with pressure, with conditionality, or with warmer engagement to lock in compliance? Will Islamabad manage its new status as a mediator and gatekeeper without alienating a powerful partner? Will Tehran test the limits of a pause by leveraging a new avenue for commerce? Each convoy that leaves Karachi or Gwadar toward Taftam will carry both freight and a message. Will the region choose commerce over confrontation, or will these roads become another front in a broader contest where borders and shipping lanes do the talking? For the men and women who load and unload So, who cross borders in battered cabs and heavy tractors? These are not abstract questions. The outcome will shape their pay, their safety, and their futures. For diplomats and strategists, the corridors are a test of whether economic openings can be paired with reliable rules and steady diplomacy. For now, the door to mediation remains open but uncertain. Messages are being sent, sometimes bluntly, sometimes cryptically, and the region waits to see which direction the next convoy will take, toward commerce, away from confrontation, or into a new kind of standoff where the movement of goods becomes a measure of influence.